Jeff Hawley, Marketing Director, if I got that right, of Allen and Heath USA and American Music and Sound, and PhD candidate in philosophy with a specialization in the philosophy of sound. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure. Always happy to talk philosophy and sound. A rare combo here to get to do that with you.
Thank you very much. I'm so excited because I studied philosophy at a much lower level, and obviously we in Pro AV sound's an important part of what we do. So my first question is, you've done some research. What was the most surprising finding? And then can you explain what that research was and why you were doing it?
Sure. I would say the most surprising finding in the research that I've been able to put out into the world so far is that live sound engineers didn't necessarily conceive of sound or view sound or picture sound, however you want to phrase that, in the way and in the location that seemed very obvious to me at least, or to seem to be, if I had to guess, if I had $20 or 20 quid, I'm going to make a bet. Most live sound engineers, when we talk about sound and where it is, are going to say, well, it's in the sound wave. Duh. We've got software that measures sound waves. We've got these tools that amplify via speakers that create more sound waves. Sounds are sound waves, and where sound waves are? Well, turns out if you survey about 1,000 of them, that's not consistently the answer, and it's not even the leading answer as to where they necessarily would say, philosophically, where sound occurs. So that was quite surprising and really has kind of led my research into some cool areas, I think.
So can you just explain to us very briefly what the 4 theories of sound are, and which one they've chosen, and how that differs from your expectation?
Sure. So first of all, part of my research, and one of the surprises and where this has somewhat led me, is that there are 4 leading theories, if I had to say. I'm starting to think there might even be a 5th that I'm hinting at here in where the research is leading. So we'll start with the 4 that are fairly commonly accepted in analytic philosophy, at least, when we say where is a sound, and somewhat what is a sound. But where is a sound? Well, I'm speaking right now, and in this room, the sound is either proximal, either in my brain, perception, the given sound that's just coming at me. It's in your mind or brain, proximally, guy. It's medial. That's the first one, proximal. Second one would be medial. It's in the sound wave. So that's in the between longitudinal compression waves in the air or some medium. Or it's distal. So the sound of my voice right now is wherever it's coming out of my mouth. It's probably a little bit in my chest vibrating, maybe a little bit of reflection off this very cool hard wall. And it's kind of wherever these reflections are happening or wherever the sounding source is. Or aspatially. So that's kind of an interesting one. So, well, there's nothing really in the sound itself without another reference point to say it is in any particular place. So it's aspatial. Not a very popular choice, but I think it's gaining some steam in my research, and as I'm digging in things. I think there's also a 5th answer that I'm looking at, which is essentially kind of all the above or none of the above. So that presupposing any one of those 4 options is just kind of faulty in the first place. If we're really being philosophically rigorous, we need a little more description or a little more rigor in how we phrase the question, where is sound? And in doing that, we might actually choose some combos of these. So hopefully that makes some sense. Very short version, it's in my brain, it's in the air, it's at the sound source where it's vibrating, or it's nowhere.
Great. So we'll come on to the theory number 5 in development in a bit. So what you found is that when you survey live sound engineers and AV professionals, instead of saying it's in the air, influenced by their training, technical training, looking at sound waves, they seem to think it's at the source.
Yeah.
Which is a different theory, and you were surprised by that. You thought their perception would be influenced by their technical training more than appears to be the case. What was the research that you were doing? Who were you speaking to, and why?
Yeah, so a number of different methods for outreach that were utilized, but essentially the goal was to have a fairly representative cross-section of live sound engineers. So this was roughly from wedding DJ level, your job is to mix sound at some level, all the way up to touring engineers. And at Allen and Heath, my day job in the industry, produced consoles, audio consoles from small analog, handful of channels, all the way up to 160 channel touring, digital, crazy consoles. And really wanted to hit that audience where their job, their livelihood, their training, their background, their education, they are pro sound engineers. Also wanted, though, in the periphery to have some sort of a control and something to bounce that off of, more of the consultants, integrators, system designer audience as well. And last but not least, some musicians and just regular people, implying that sound engineers are not regular, which I think is probably correct.
Yes.
So all of that combined, we had roughly about 1,000 responses. So this was to readers of live sound magazines, social media outreach through Allen and Heath, and my own personal networks, and essentially through that survey process, validating how many years did you study music, do you understand music theory, are you certified in CTS credits through Avixa or whatever it may be, various methods of essentially validating, yes, this person counts by the definition I've roughly chosen with enough years and background to be a professional, and their answer doesn't match up with what I thought. What do I do with that?
Fantastic. So we'll come on to theory number 5, and we'll come on to the question of whose opinion should we weigh more, less, or equally, the sound engineer or the a priori philosopher.
Yeah.
At this stage, I want to ask you about a second surprise. How much consistency in theories was there in intuitions about what the correct response was there? So you asked questions to elicit people's views in more than one way. What did you find?
Yeah, this is a common technique in various surveys that you can use. You can either introduce what are called priming effects to, I'll be careful with the way I say this, but you can kind of trick or lead the witness, and how easy it is based on the changing the particular phrasing or question should tell you a little bit about how committed they are to a particular view. You can also ask a question just a few different ways, and if you spot different answers where you've only subtly changed something, that also can kind of let you point at consistency errors, or at least less commitment to a particular position. And really the surprise here not only was the medial sound wave view not the leader for live sound engineers particularly, but live sound engineers weren't really that much more consistent in their views than anybody else. So you could ask something like the proverbial, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around, well, that's really a proximal theory. What that comes out of is early work from idealist philosophers who thought, well, really all we have is perception in the hearer, in the perceiver, and without a perceiver, there's no sound. Strangely, you were getting live sound engineers in the survey kind of agreeing with Berkeley and these early idealist philosophers, but then holding in another question a distal view. And then when we ask about, where is the sound of the concert, it might be more of a medial view. And when I look and basically did a bit of a ranking and points assigned to these different questions and consistency, live sound engineers with tons of training did no better than the general man or woman on the street as far as consistency goes.
So that's very interesting. So you've asked the live sound engineer, where is sound? And they've said, it's at the source, it's not in the sound wave. But they're not remotely consistent about that when you ask the question with different phrasing or different situational factors. So then I'd ask you, why are you asking sound engineers and other sound professionals what their views are in a survey? And how much weight do you attach to their views compared to what's already written down?
Yeah, well, I'm sure, as you know, Guy, with some philosophical background yourself, this is a big, heated question, and particularly where it shows up in philosophy is why should we trust scientists more than non-scientists? And I think this is a version of that, what fancy terminology here, social epistemology sort of question. So why is science more trusted than non-science? Where do we draw these edges? And one of the ways you kind of get at, well, we should trust scientists because they're the experts in this and they have training. So if we apply a similar sort of view here where we think, the sound engineers have done this for a long time, they probably know what they're doing, it would seem to me, well, we ought to listen to what they say on this topic then. And maybe we also ask the scientists, who are this slightly different group that are the system designers and engineers who design the products. And maybe we should ask this other set of experts. And I think you see where I'm going with this. Okay, we've got 3 different experts who expert is defined in 3 different ways. That, I think, already was a philosophically interesting question. And what I was further surprised was it kind of seemed nobody really was off the charts, just super hyper consistent and had this all down. Different experts, if you're going to say trust the experts, you got to decide who the expert is. And in this case, there would seem to be no clear front runner. So the short version, my initial thought was live sound engineers are going to totally be medial theorists. It's going to be awesome. They're experts. They're highly trained. Yes, they were. They'd had lots of training. They had lots of years of experience, but they didn't agree on where sound is. And when you looked across questions, they weren't consistent. So are they really experts, or is there some other problem going on here?
So what I would ask is inconsistency in the way that people talk about philosophical issues, such as where is sound, what is sound, is that not typical of a really interesting philosophical problem? Because if you ask people about ethical questions, you ask it one way, you ask it another, you can elicit different responses. The same goes for questions, say, about free will. So have you really uncovered firm evidence of just how wildly inconsistent people's views can be on an interesting philosophical topic?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think on the philosophical side, you did hit on some really cool, arguably modern. I mean, I think you could look at it and see precedents in philosophy. Certainly, I think famous philosophers like David Hume, if he had the ability to go out and do surveys, I think he's the type of philosopher that would. But there's a bit of a movement, I'll say, somewhat new in the capabilities that now philosophers have to do these sort of surveys. But I think just going and asking people and gathering intuitions and looking for these sorts of things as a tool of philosophy is certainly a new trend. Experimental philosophy is what it's called, or x-phi. And I think what this research has really uncovered isn't necessarily completely groundbreaking. It's not rewriting for everybody what we mean by sound. I'm not going to go change the dictionaries because of my research. But what I think I have uncovered is that there's something really in need of some clarity in our languaging and speaking and conceptualizing. And I think as an industry, kind of now coming over to the professional side of things, groups like AVIXA and AES and these papers that are being published, I think there could be some additional clarity brought to the way we use language. I think that a little more rigor, not quite converting it over to sentential calculus and getting crazy with how formalized. It doesn't need to be a perfect language, but I think how we just use sound very roughly, and particularly marketers like myself, I think much too loose. I think the survey further validates that, we should probably be a little careful when we're pointing out and speaking about sound.
I'm looking forward to the day when we carry on using natural language with all its imperfections, which is good enough up to a point, but then runs into trouble in certain use cases. Maybe we can get our AI agents to talk with a purely scientific language that eliminates natural language for us. And then my agent, I'll talk one way, my AI agent will convert it into a perfect language. your AI agent will decode it and convert it back into natural speech that is precise enough for you. That's science fiction, that's not philosophy. But
Exactly. Well, perhaps it is philosophy. I mean, there were certainly philosophers, and if I had to align myself with any school of philosophers throughout history, the logical positivists and Viennese philosophers, or at least a movement in Austria in that kind of 1920s through 40s, that was what they set out to do in some way. We should have a more scientific language. We should be able to move to this ideal language where we can start to dissolve these problems, or at least look at why they are pseudo problems, primarily because of language problems. So my full PhD title is Philosophy of Sound, Dissolving Pseudo Problems via Logical Positivist Methods. A lot of what they're up to I don't think we should use. It's kind of a bad word in some philosophical circles to say you're a logical positivist. But I think on this particular term, what you just described, if somehow AI or some methodology to say essentially something like, where does sound occur? And then almost like a little asterisk. And by sound, I mean this, a little more definition. And by occur, I mean this. And by where, I mean this. I think with just a little clarification, some of these problems do dissolve in some way, philosophically speaking. And that's what the survey also is seeming to point to. So more work needed there. That's essentially the conclusion of my PhD is, does this method work? But I think that's how we could kind of get through to solving this problem.
Moving on just slightly, because this is a teaser for philosophy rather than philosophy itself. You found, moving on from where is sound to what is sound, you asked people about echoes. What did you find that was interesting there?
Yeah, this is really a contentious topic, I think, in philosophy of sound, and the scholars who are working in this space. A lot of really interesting papers, and myself, some of the papers that I published on this topic. The idea that echoes are a continuation of the original sound, and that if I was to clap in this room and you kind of heard the echoes come after it, much more like a really, like almost like a cartoon echo version. You know, just for clarity, if I said, clap and you heard clap, 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 clap. Each one of those as being a continuation of the original sound is likely, if I had to say, the prevailing view in philosophy of sound scholarship. For almost everybody I surveyed, the inverse view was the case, that echoes are standalone, ontological, to use the fancy philosophical term, but basically they're standalone things. Each one of those is their own separate object.
So the sound professionals thought the echo was a different sound
Correct.
from the original sound, and philosophers so far have tended to think they're the same sound. You did mention theory number 5. So the idea that all our current views are partially correct or partially incorrect. Is that something you're working on currently?
Yes. So this fifth position that you can take, there are hints of this in the literature, where Anton Killen is one contemporary philosopher who leans in this direction. He did that. Basically, the question itself is phrased in a way where you kind of can say all the above or none of the above when you ask where is sound. And I think, going back to, again, some of my philosophical heroes in the early 20th century, one of the things that they really hit on was this idea that what's important as far as how we get to what something means is how we verify it. And so verifying something in very basic terms may be as simple as, well, how we scientifically might test something. And if we're trying to say, well, the position of particle X is Y, well, how you actually are measuring and the methodology you use is kind of what measuring and position mean. There's not much more there. And this verificationist theory that was popular at the time runs into some problems. So I don't think I can solve everything with it, but basically what I'm getting at and where I think my research is leading is that, at least in this case, that seems to be what we're missing. If we were to add back in something like, and by measuring or verifying, I mean this sort of method, and we can agree on it, then I think we've got much more consistency about where sound is. I might totally need the medial view or the proximal view for the story and the case and the instance of sound location. So, and by the way, when I say it's located there, I mean just like our perception of it. That's what I mean by location in that case. Not this other way. And I think if you just work in what we mean by location, the method of verification, then that kind of can lead us to answering the question. In its current form, I think actually this all the above, none of the above is probably the leading answer, and actually the survey data points to that. There's no clear-cut winner. In various cases, when you look at the inconsistency, you could almost say, well, these three answers seem to be the most common answers for this question. These other three are maybe the ones in this one, and there was no clear-cut winners. But once I teased at, given the method of verification of putting a microphone in the room, even just a subtle hint, I didn't even say where to put the microphone, can skew it now where people think, oh, well, sound waves because it's a microphone, and you'd see a lean in the answers to consistency in a medial view, which is what a microphone would verify. So I think there's evidence to show that as it sits now, all the above, none of the above, if we're not identifying our method of verification. And my proposed solution is we find some way in language to just include a bit more of that. And I think we can increase our consistency, and I think we can point to some final answer as long as the verification is in there. I think the problem is we miss it, and therefore we can't actually answer the question consistently.
Well, that opens up a whole
Yes.
another half hour of conversation. We only have so much time. What I'd like to ask you about now is why, with a great career in audio technology and in audio technology marketing, do you now choose to spend your free time studying issues in the philosophy of sound? Are you still sane? Or why do you do this?
Yeah, I think I'm at least partially sane, not fully. And I think part of that craziness, maybe another way of putting it, is just this annoying back of my head, even just talking with the crew and the other folks from the team here before we even started, we got onto these really cool topics, and it seemed everybody had a story that they could say, you know, I remember in my philosophy class they said this, and I thought, geez, that's totally bunk. And someone else saying, well, I picked the wrong day to not partake in various substances, because we knew we got into these topics, and they thought, oh, this is going to be real heady and fun. And it just, I think that side of this idea that there's these unanswered questions and somebody needs to step in and try to answer these, that's just really why I started getting interested in philosophy and why it keeps me interested. And I think the longer that I've been in the music industry and in the pro audio and marketing side of things, I just was seeing these ads that I couldn't stop myself. You can't say that. That's logically inconsistent. And in these demos where people were, not meaning ill, I don't think they meant anything. They're not trying to be sneaky about it, but just, that's not really how this works. That's not consistent. And I think I just kind of hit a point where somebody needs to kind of see what everybody thinks and try to move this forward a little bit. So again, don't think I'm necessarily going to rewrite the definition of sound or totally revamp the world. All sound is some other thing from here on out. No, but I think at least within this industry, a little more attention and fun conversations like we've been able to have today is really the goal, and that's what I'm up to.
But we're going to stop there. Jeff Hawley, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure learning about your research, and I'm just so happy that we can share some of it with other people.
Great, thank you.